Everyone's favorite trickster god Loki, considered to be one of the most popular MCU characters thanks to a wonderful performance by Tom Hiddleston, is well on his way to making his live-action TV debut in the upcoming Marvel's Loki. However, the MCU Loki is quite different not just from his comic book counterpart, but from the mythology that inspired him in the first place. So, with that in mind, let's go through some of the ways our beloved trickster changed from myth to page to screen. For comic book supervillains, coming back from the dead is practically a children's parlor trick, like taking off your thumb. But Loki's resurrection in the comics deserves a few points for style. After Loki had manipulated Norman Osborn into sending his Dark Avengers team to attack Asgard, he sacrificed himself to fix the mess he made. But not before manipulating Hela into taking his name out of the Book of Hell, meaning he didn't have to stay in the underworld and could instead be reborn, effectively making him immortal. Now, this whole resurrection business actually led to the existence of 3 different versions of Loki in the comics, 2 of them even at the same time. After he tricked Hela, Loki was reborn into a new body and rechristened himself Kid Loki, and later managed to transform an echo of his former older self in the form of a magpie named Cole, who would eventually reclaim Kid Loki's body. Imagine having your older self as a pet bird. A pet bird that you named the inverse of your name. That's only a little weird. This hasn't really come up in the MCU so far, but Asgardians, including the otherwise adopted Loki, share a common and very convenient superpower in the comics. Specifically, we're talking about the Allspeak, also known as the All-Tongue, which causes everything they say to be clearly understood in the native language of whoever is listening, and the Asgardians themselves understand whatever they're saying. And yes, this does include other deities and aliens. Now, far be it from me to claim that Tom Hiddleston's Loki doesn't look cool in his various gold-rimmed jackets and occasional armor, but frankly, he's got nothing on comics Loki, who seems to enjoy coming up with a new outlandish outfit for every new wicked scheme. From rocking fur collars to going slim and sleek or dressing up in full Viking Age garb, Loki has a wardrobe for everything, with the one near constant seeming to be the golden horns. And I don't know about you, but I am stoked to see those coming back in the Disney Plus series. While Loki has displayed many magical abilities in the comics, much like the Allspeak, there is one that seems to have gone overlooked, and that's the power of teleportation. And we're not talking about your garden variety poof around the battlefield teleportation either. Loki's ability is so strong, he can actually transport himself and others between dimensions, making him very difficult to imprison. Loki was pretty shocked to find out that he was a frost giant in the first Thor movie and didn't exactly take it too well. But this was hardly news to comics fans, or even to comic book Asgardians, including Loki himself. Unlike in the movies, Loki's actual heritage was never really a secret, and good old Daddy Odin didn't particularly try to treat him equally to Thor because of it. Between this and banishing the MCU version of Hela to the underworld, no version of Odin is going to win any Parent of the Year awards anytime soon. When you look at Loki and his frost giant brethren, it can be pretty hard to see the family resemblance, considering the latter is a race of, giants. But if I were you, I wouldn't hold my breath expecting Loki to someday pull some epic transformation into a true blue giant to lay the smackdown on some pesky superheroes, because he truly does not actually have a frost giant form in the comics at all. Now, why an adopted frost giant somehow looks exactly like the species that adopted him is a pretty good question. But it's probably because he was never actually a frost giant in myth. While Loki and Thor make for the quintessential sibling rivalry in the comics, and a lot of their conflict stems from fighting for approval from their father figure, this and Loki's heritage is a fabrication on the part of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. In fact, he's not even Odin's adoptive son in the myths at all. Rather, he is Odin's sworn blood brother, which really makes him more of an honorary uncle to Thor than anything else. Alright, now that we're getting into Loki's heritage, let's take a brief look at his father while we're at it. While in the myths that inspired Loki, he really was the son of Laufey, the latter wasn't actually frost giant. In fact, he wasn't even Loki's father, but his mother, and the word is still out on whether or not Laufey was even any kind of giant at all. However, his actual father, named Farbauti, definitely was. But since Norse mythological giants were not necessarily always literally gigantic, Loki remains stuck at regular old Asgardian size. Want to tangle up Loki's family tree even more? Let's talk about all of his children from Norse myth, because let me tell you, Loki likes to get busy. Aside from having 2 sons named Vali and Nari with his wife Sigyn, sorry folks, he's taken, he enjoyed a few romps before he got hitched and has fathered some impressive children, namely the giant wolf Fenrir, Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, and even none other than Hela, the goddess of death, who is otherwise his adopted older sister in the comics and the MCU. Let's try to not bring this up during the next family dinner. Things are awkward enough in that family already. Now, you may have heard of Lady Loki, the female form Loki took while in the comics. Now, this wasn't something Marvel pulled out of nowhere and is actually pretty accurate to the mythological Loki. Being a shapeshifter, Norse Loki had absolutely no issue switching sex or even species on the fly. Now, this also means that we can add one more child to the list, as Loki is also the mother of Odin's 8-legged horse Sleipnir due to having had relations with the legendary stallion Svadilfari. I'll let you do the math on how his shapeshifting powers came in handy for that one. One of Thor's defining characteristics is his claim to the magical hammer Mjolnir that can only be wielded by those deemed worthy. Now, you wouldn't think that includes his slippery, villainous brother, but Mjolnir has some strange definitions of the word worthy, and in the comics, Loki has actually lifted it not once, but 3 times. Granted, one time it hadn't yet been enchanted, and it took him briefly becoming a god of heroism the second time, but as late as 2020, Loki wielded it after Thor got Odin's powers, which caused all old enchantments to go haywire. But hey, Loki actually has a pretty good claim to Mjolnir. After all, it was him who gave it to Thor in the first place. In myth, Loki tended to try and make up for whatever trouble he caused around Asgard, and after a particularly bad screw-up, he managed to bargain with 2 dwarves, Brock and Atri, to make great treasures for the Asgardians, one of those being Mjolnir, which was given to Thor. This event was actually depicted in the 2010 Loki series of Marvel Comics, complete with some more grisly mythological details that YouTube probably won't let us show. Now, there's no doubt that you already knew that Loki knows his way around a magic spell or 2, but the comics version really likes to emphasize just how great of a sorcerer he is. So great, in fact, that he once took over Stephen Strange's position as Sorcerer Supreme. Though in true Loki fashion, he did so by tricking Strange into thinking that all the Vishanti, a trio of gods that Strange answers to in the comics, wanted him to hand over the title. Still, Loki is a god, so his skills at magic are absolutely not to be underestimated. Now, the biggest change from Norse Loki to the Marvel version is probably that, by all accounts, he shouldn't be out causing trouble in the first place. In myth, once the Asgardians had just about enough of Loki's shenanigans, they ended up tying him to a rock in a cave and condemning him to have a snake drip venom on his face for all of eternity. Sure, his wife Sigyn catches most of it in a bowl, but when she has to empty it, Loki then writhes in pain so hard that he causes earthquakes to happen in the human world. How's that for a timeout? With Loki being set to travel through time to clean up the mess he's made in the upcoming series, one wonders if we'll see any of these mentioned aspects come into play. A status as lead character certainly allows him many more ways to show off his cunning and magic, so things will no doubt be interesting.